The October wind cut through the alley like a knife through silk, carrying with it the iron scent of blood and the stale smell of garbage that had rotted for weeks in the dark. The black sedan sat idling 3 blocks away, its engine a low growl that only the men inside could hear. But inside the upscale Italian restaurant on 6th and Madison, in the private booth draped in white linen and candlelight, something far more devastating was unfolding. Emma Bianchi, 7 years old, with dark curls and her father's sharp eyes, lay across the velvet cushion of the back booth. Her small body convulsed. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. Around her stood 12 men in tailored suits, men whose hands had ended careers, ended lives, men who had stared down federal prosecutors and walked free. Men who answered to Aleandro Bianchi, the most ruthless mafia boss the West Coast had ever known. And every single one of them was frozen. The child's seizure had started without warning. One moment she was coloring quietly with crayons the restaurant owner had brought her. The next moment, her body went rigid. Her eyes rolled back. Foam flecked the corner of her mouth. Sergio, Aleandro's second-in-command for the past 18 years, stood 3 feet away, his hand reaching toward the child but not touching her, unsure, paralyzed by the weight of what he was witnessing. Because Aleandro's daughter had been missing for 6 months. She had been presumed dead. And now she was dying in front of him. Aleandro himself stood at the edge of the booth, his face carved from granite. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. A thin scar ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, a reminder of the night his own brother had betrayed him, had sold their family to the Gambino organization, had chosen money over blood. That scar pulled tight now as his jaw clenched. His dark eyes, which had watched men beg for mercy they would never receive, were fixed on his daughter's convulsing body with an expression his lieutenants had never seen before. Terror. Absolute, consuming terror. "Call an ambulance," he said, his voice low and steady, but Pietro was already dialing. The phone was ringing. The operator was answering. But an ambulance would take 6 minutes to arrive. Maybe more in the October traffic. Emma had been seizing for 45 seconds already. The restaurant's back door, the one that led to the kitchen and then the alley beyond, swung open with violent force. And into the candlelit silence stumbled a woman. She was small, barely 5'3", with auburn hair matted with blood. Her left eye was swollen shut, the surrounding skin already turning purple and black. Her neck bore 5 handprints, 5 distinct marks where someone's fingers had pressed so hard the skin had split. Her white waitress uniform, the one with the name tag that read Mia, was torn at the shoulder. She was gasping for breath, one hand pressed to her ribs as if they might shatter if she moved. Mia Harper had been beaten within an inch of her life. And in the moment she stumbled through that door, in the instant her functioning eye adjusted to the candlelight, she saw the child. She saw Aleandro's frozen face. She saw the 12 men in suits standing motionless. She saw the seizure that continued, that would not stop, that was stealing away that small girl's consciousness with each passing second. Everyone else was paralyzed. But Mia moved. Despite the pain that screamed through her ribs, despite the dizziness that made the room spin, despite the fact that she had never laid eyes on this man or this child before in her life, she moved. She crossed the restaurant in 4 quick steps, each one an agony, and she placed her bleeding hands on Emma's small shoulders. "I need water," Mia said, her voice hoarse and broken but commanding. "Now." And something soft. A pillow, a coat, anything. Sergio blinked. Moved. Suddenly the room unfroze. The water came. Mia tilted Emma's head gently to the side so that if she vomited, she would not choke. She placed her own ruined jacket under the child's head. She counted the seconds of the seizure aloud, a calm, steady counting that filled the silence. 30 seconds more. 40. 50. The seizure stopped at 62 seconds. Emma's body went limp. Her breathing, though shallow, continued. Her eye fluttered once, twice, then closed. "The ambulance is 4 minutes away," Pietro said quietly into the phone. Mia did not move her hands. She knelt beside the booth, her own body screaming in protest, her breath coming in shallow gasps to match the child's. She watched Emma's chest rise and fall. Rise and fall. The only sound in the restaurant was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant wail of sirens approaching through the October night. "What is your name?" Aleandro's voice came from above her, low and hollow, like a man speaking from the bottom of a well. "Mia," she whispered. "Mia Harper." He looked at this woman who had stumbled into his restaurant broken and bleeding, this woman who had not hesitated for a single second, who had moved while everyone around him froze, who had saved the only thing in the world that still tethered him to life. And something shifted in his expression. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. The sirens grew louder. The ambulance pulled up outside. Paramedics rushed in with equipment and urgent questions. They examined Emma with practiced efficiency. "She stabilized," one of them said. "We need to get her to County General. Get her monitored. Run tests." As they loaded Emma onto the stretcher, the child's small hand reached out. Found Mia's hand. Held on. "Don't leave," Emma said, her voice thin as paper. "Please don't leave." Mia squeezed the small fingers with her own trembling ones. "I am not going anywhere, sweetheart. I am right here." Aleandro watched this exchange. Watched this broken woman comfort his daughter as if she had known her for years. As if they belonged to each other. 3 blocks away, in the darkness of a parked black SUV, Douglas Hale, who had ordered Mia's beating just 40 minutes earlier, received a text message on his phone. The message contained only 2 words and a location. He went pale. The man sitting beside him, the one who had delivered the beating, the one whose knuckles were still spotted with Mia's blood, turned to look at Hale with genuine confusion. "What is it?" the enforcer asked. Douglas Hale did not answer. He was already understanding what it meant that the cameras had captured everything. That she had gone to the one place on earth where no one could touch her. That she had walked into the territory of the one man who would burn the entire city to the ground if anyone so much as bruised her now. He had made a catastrophic mistake. If you are still watching, then you understand that something extraordinary just happened. That in the span of 60 seconds, everything changed. Before we continue and reveal what happens next, how this night transforms both Mia and Aleandro, how the truth about her suffering comes to light, how the people who hurt her face consequences they cannot escape, please drop a like if this story is hitting you. Share it with someone you love. Subscribe so you do not miss what unfolds tomorrow. Because what comes next will shake you. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a woman with only $5 to her name became the one person the most powerful man in Los Angeles would die to protect. 12 hours before Mia Harper walked through those restaurant doors, she was counting coins on a kitchen floor. $5.83. That was everything. The bills were already paid, rent on the converted closet she slept in, the minimum payment on Douglas Hale's debt that somehow never decreased no matter how much she paid. $22,000 he claimed she owed him. 7 days to find it or he would come for her the way he always did. The Ashford family's mansion was still sleeping. Mia moved through the darkness of the kitchen like she was supposed to be invisible, because mostly, she was. 3 years she had worked here. 3 years of 14-hour days, 7 days a week, sleeping for hours if she was lucky, waking before anyone else to prepare breakfast for children who called her by her first name only when no one was listening. The kitchen was cold. October had turned brutal in Los Angeles, the kind of cold that felt personal. Dead leaves pressed against the window, and the wind outside made sounds like something being dragged across concrete. Mia wrapped her cardigan tighter, the same cardigan she had worn for 5 years, the fabric thin enough to see through if you look closely, which no one did. She opened her pocket again. The $5 was real. The 83 cents was real. The foreclosure notice on the counter was real, typed in official letters that seemed to scream at her. 48 hours. That was how long she had to produce $22,000 or Victoria Ashford's property, where Mia lived in a closet, where she belonged to the Ashford family more than she belonged to herself, would be seized. But the notice wasn't from a bank. It was from Douglas Hale. The handwriting across the bottom was shaky, deliberate, the kind of penmanship that came from someone taking their time with a threat. Pay by Thursday or I collect what you owe me in other ways. The message was followed by a phone number and nothing else. Mia had stopped eating breakfast 6 months ago. She took the children's leftovers, the crusts of toast no one finished, the apple slices that had turned brown at the edges, sometimes the scrambled eggs they pushed around their plates. This morning, there was nothing left over. The children had been hungry yesterday. She had made sure of that. The recipe book sat on the windowsill above the sink. It had belonged to her grandmother, Lucia, a woman Mia had never met but whose handwriting covered every margin of every page. Not just recipes. Notes. Survival notes written in Italian in a hand that shook with determination. When the hunger comes, remember that your body is stronger than your fear. When they tell you that you are nothing, know that you are everything. The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think. Mia opened the book to a random page. Pasta e fagioli. Her grandmother had written beside the recipe, made this for 4 days straight when your grandfather lost everything. We ate it for every meal. He said it tasted like hope. The sound of footsteps from upstairs made Mia close the book quickly. She slid it back to the edge of the windowsill, the place where it had sat for 3 years, untouched by anyone but her. Victoria Ashford appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:45 in the morning, the same time she appeared every morning. She was a woman whose face had been worked on so many times that it had begun to look like a failure, each procedure fighting against the last. Her hair was blonde, the color of something artificial. Her robe was silk, the kind that cost more than Mia made in a month. Around her neck was a pearl necklace that had belonged to someone else's grandmother once. The children need new uniforms for school, Victoria said. She did not look at Mia. She never looked directly at her, as though making eye contact would cause some kind of contamination. The ones they have are worn. It reflects poorly on the family. Yes, Mrs. Ashford, Mia said. And Mia, the house is feeling cold. I would like you to ensure the fireplaces are lit by tonight. The weather is turning. Yes, Mrs. Ashford. Victoria left without another word. The children, Emma, age 7, and Thomas, age 9, came down 10 minutes later, already dressed for school, their uniforms immaculate despite Victoria's complaints. They had learned early that their mother noticed only imperfections. Emma climbed into the kitchen chair and looked at Mia with the kind of scrutiny only children can manage. You look sad today, Emma said. I am not sad, Mia said, and it was almost true. Sadness would have required feeling something. What she felt was absence, the way a body feels when it has not eaten for too long. My teacher says that sad people smile more because they are trying to hide it, Emma said. Are you trying to hide it? Mia set a plate of eggs in front of Emma. Toast with butter. A glass of milk. Everything the Ashfords could afford and everything Mia could not. Eat, sweetheart. You have a long day at school. By the time she walked the children to their private school 3 blocks away, it was 7:20. The morning was crystalline and cruel. The sun was up but it gave no warmth. Los Angeles was showing its teeth. She had a shift at the restaurant at 11. Before that, she needed to clean the house, do the laundry, prepare lunch for the household staff, and find some way to convince Douglas Hale that she was serious about finding money that did not exist. The wind caught her cardigan as she walked back toward the mansion. It felt like fingers. Everything felt like something trying to take from her. The air felt like it was stealing her breath. The sun felt like it was burning the skin off her face. The ground felt like it was pulling her down. By the time she reached the restaurant at 4 minutes past 11, she had walked 7 miles. Her feet were bleeding into her shoes, small spots of red at her heel and between her toes. She did not remember making this decision. Her body had simply moved from one place to another, the way it always did. The palazzo was upscale, the kind of restaurant where the tablecloths were linen and the silverware was real. The owner, who kept a framed photograph of Aleandro Bianchi on his office wall even though he would never admit this to anyone, had hired Mia 3 years ago because she was quiet and because she never asked questions. She changed into her uniform, a black dress, white apron, shoes that had a hole worn into the sole, in the kitchen. Her reflection in the stainless steel of the refrigerator was someone she almost did not recognize. Thin. Hollowed. Eyes that had forgotten what hope looked like. "You look terrible," said Marco, one of the line cooks, not unkindly. "When is the last time you slept?" "Last week," Mia said, and they both knew she was joking because they both knew she was not joking at all. The shift was long. Her feet screamed. Her back curved into a question mark by hour 4. A man at table 12 snapped his fingers at her and she came running. A woman at table 7 sent back her risotto because it was not quite the right shade of gold. Mia apologized for something that was not her fault and brought new risotto that was identical to the first. At 11:56 in the evening, her phone buzzed. The message was from an unknown number. "I know where you live. I know where you work. You have 6 hours." She did not recognize the sender, but she knew what it meant. She had known Douglas Hale long enough to understand his language. This was the sound of a door closing. This was the sound of time running out. The night outside the restaurant windows had turned into the kind of darkness that felt solid. The wind was picking up. By midnight, it would be vicious. While Mia's phone buzzed with threats in the restaurant kitchen, across the city in a mansion that occupied an entire block of the Los Feliz Hills, a man sat in absolute darkness. Aleandro Bianchi was 47 years old but moved like someone who had lived through centuries of loss. His office had no windows. The walls were mahogany. A single lamp cast gold light across his desk, and in that light, his face showed the architecture of controlled fury, angular jaw, silver threading through dark hair at the temples, a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a map of a wound that had never fully healed. He was reviewing surveillance footage on a monitor, watching men in black suits move through a warehouse in Vernon. The footage was 16 months old. His daughter Emma had been missing for 184 days. The phone on his desk rang at exactly 12:07 in the morning. Sergio's voice came through the speaker, urgent and compressed. "We have a location. Downtown restaurant." The owner called. "Something is happening." Aleandro did not move. His fingers, which wore a gold signet ring and a silver band that had belonged to his mother, remained flat on the desk. "I will be there in 8 minutes." The drive downtown took exactly that. Sergio and Pietro sat in the front of the black SUV while Aleandro occupied the back seat alone, his cashmere coat folded across his lap, a coat that cost more than Mia's annual salary, though he would never think about money in such terms. Money was something that moved through his life like water through a sieve. What mattered was control. What mattered was information. What mattered was that somewhere in this city, his daughter was drawing breath or she was not, and he had spent 594 days learning which possibility was the only one he could bear. The restaurant came into view. From the street, it looked ordinary, white tablecloths visible through tall windows, candles flickering on each table, the soft sound of a classical piano filtering out onto the October night. Aleandro walked through the front door with Sergio and Pietro behind him, and the entire restaurant went silent in the way that air goes silent right before a lightning strike. He was not unknown in Los Angeles. He was not feared because his name appeared in newspapers. He was feared because his name did not. The owner, a man named Giuseppe, appeared from the kitchen with his hands trembling. "Signor Bianchi, I called because..." Aleandro raised one hand and walked past him toward the back of the restaurant, toward the private booth where he conducted certain conversations that required discretion. What he found there froze every cell in his body. Emma was sitting on the banquette. She was 7 years old and she was bleeding from a head wound that looked like it had come from a car impact. Her small dress was torn. Her eyes were closed. And standing over her, applying pressure to the wound with a cloth soaked in blood, was a woman Aleandro had never seen before. The woman looked like she had been put through hell. One eye was swollen shut. Handprints bruised her throat in purple crescents. Her uniform, a waitress's uniform, black dress and white apron, was torn at the shoulder. But her hands were steady. Her voice, when she spoke, was trembling like something that had learned to survive only by refusing to stop moving. "I found her," Mia said, not looking up from Emma's head. "I was taking out trash and I found her in the alley. There was a car. I think she was hit. I think," the woman's voice cracked. "I think someone left her there." The room had become a place where no one could breathe. Sergio and Pietro stood frozen. Giuseppe had backed away into shadow. But Aleandro was moving, dropping to his knees beside the booth, his hands reaching toward his daughter with a tenderness that neither Sergio nor Pietro had witnessed in the 15 years they had worked for him. "Emma," he said. His voice was barely audible. "Emma, Papa is here." Emma's eyes opened. Recognition flooded her small face. She tried to sit up and Mia's hands pressed gently downward. "Don't move," Mia said. "The bleeding is slowing. We need to keep pressure." "What is your name?" Aleandro asked. "Mia Harper. I work here. I've worked here for 3 years." He looked at this broken woman who was holding his daughter's head with more care than he had received from most people in his entire life. Something shifted in his chest, something cold and dangerous that was not rage but the opposite of rage. It was recognition. It was seeing someone who had been taught by life to be nobody, and choosing anyway to act. "Sergio, call the hospital. Tell them we are coming and we need the best pediatric specialist in the city in the emergency room in 4 minutes. Senior." For minutes. The ambulance ride to Cedars-Sinai took 17 minutes because the roads were clear and Sergio had arranged police escort. Mia rode beside Emma, her hand never leaving the wound, her voice steady as water describing what had happened, where she found her, what she had seen. At the hospital, doctors took Emma into imaging and Aleandro stood in the waiting room with his hands in fists at his sides. He looked at Mia and for the first time noticed that she was visibly injured. "You need a doctor." "I'm fine," Mia said. "You are not fine. Your eye is closing. Your throat shows evidence of strangulation. Someone beat you tonight." Mia's face went very still. She did not answer. This silence told him everything. "Who did this to you?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is—" "It matters," Aleandro said, and his voice carried the weight of someone for whom the word mattered had been redefined across decades of loss. "Sit down. I will have someone examine you." Mia sat because she was too exhausted to stand, too broken to resist. A hospital doctor came and examined her injuries, 2 cracked ribs, a fractured wrist, contusions across her throat consistent with hands squeezing pressure there. The doctor left the room and Aleandro waited until the door closed. "Tell me who did this. Why do you care?" Mia's voice came out hollow. "I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress." "Because the people who did this believed you were nobody," Aleandro said, and something in his eyes shifted from steel to something deeper. "And that belief needs to be corrected." He sat across from her in the small hospital room, his expensive coat across his lap, his scar visible in the fluorescent light, and he asked her questions. Where had she come from? What had happened to her? How long she had been this way? Mia found herself answering because something about him, something in the way he had knelt beside his daughter, in the way he looked at her now like she was a human being instead of a problem to be solved, made her want to tell the truth. She told him about Douglas Hale. She told him about the $22,000 debt, the money that had been a loan for her sister's hospital bill, the surgery that came too late anyway, the money that had somehow tripled in interest over 3 years. She told him about Victoria Ashford, the Ashford family she worked for, how Victoria kept promising to help her pay it off, how Victoria had introduced her to Hale, how the debt had become a noose that was tightening. 3 years, Aleandro said. This has been happening for 3 years? And 7 days, Mia said. I have 7 days before Hale comes to collect. I have $5 in my pocket. That is the total of my assets. Aleandro stood up. He walked to the window of the hospital room and looked out at the Los Angeles night, at the city lights scattered like a fallen constellation. His hands were at his sides. His shoulders were very still. But Sergio, who knew him better than anyone alive, would have recognized the shift, the way his breathing had changed, the way his whole body had gone into a mode of absolute focus. "You will not go back to that restaurant," he said. "You will not go back to the Ashford house. You will not go back to any place that person knows. Someone will come to you in the morning with a phone and an address. You will go there. You will rest. You will let doctors examine your injuries properly. And you will stop believing that you are nobody, because the woman who saved my daughter's life is not a nobody. She is the only person who mattered in that moment." Mia stared at him. "I don't understand." "You do not need to understand. You need to trust." He left the room. In the hallway, Sergio was waiting. "Find me everything about Douglas Hale," Aleandro said. "Find me everything about Victoria Ashford. Find me the network. Find me the connections. I want names, bank accounts, locations, frequencies. And then I want to understand why I am only learning about this tonight." Sergio's face had gone very pale. "Signor, we will investigate immediately." "Not investigate. Dismantle." The word hung in the hospital hallway like a death sentence. Inside the hospital room, Mia sat alone and wondered if she had imagined the entire conversation, if the pain from her injuries had finally cracked something inside her mind. But on the table beside her, a phone appeared an hour later, brought by a woman in scrubs who was not actually a nurse. The phone was unlocked. There was a single address on the screen and nothing else. Mia looked at her hands, which had held her grandmother's recipe book the night before, which had held pressure on a child's bleeding head hours ago, which had somehow set in motion something massive and terrible and possibly miraculous. The city outside the hospital window was turning dark. The October wind was rising. And Mia Harper, who had been nobody for so long that she had forgotten how to spell her own name, was about to become someone whose story would change everything. The phone in Mia's hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She stared at the address on the unlocked screen, her fingers trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Outside the hospital window, the October night pressed against the glass like something alive and hungry. Dead leaves scraped across the parking lot below, driven by wind that cut through every layer of clothing. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of something massive shifting toward her. By dawn, Aleandro Bianchi's investigators had compiled a file 3 inches thick. Douglas Hale. Victoria Ashford. 18 names connected to a trafficking network that had been operating for 7 years in plain sight, protected by police contacts and wealthy enablers who looked the other way because looking away was profitable. Sergio spread the photographs across the table in Aleandro's private office. Bank transfers. Shipping manifests. Hotel registrations where desperate women had been photographed before and after. The before photographs showed hope. The after photographs showed nothing at all. "Signor," Sergio said quietly, "the Ashford woman, she was employing the Harper girl specifically. Every payment to Hale came through her accounts. She was using the nanny as a conduit, routing money through the household expenses." Aleandro studied the photograph of Victoria Ashford. 53 years old, blonde, wearing a pearl necklace that probably cost more than most people's houses. She smiled in every photograph. A charity gala. A country club event. Her husband on her arm, completely unaware that his wife was trading human beings like currency. And Hale, Aleandro said. Currently at a warehouse in Long Beach. Celebrating a delivery. 14 women arrived 3 hours ago. They are being prepared for transport to Nevada. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Pietro, standing by the door, kept his expression absolutely neutral, but his jaw tightened. In 15 years, he had learned that when Aleandro went quiet like this, when his hands went very still on the desk in front of him, men were about to disappear. "Get the women out," Aleandro said. "Alert the lapped." Anonymous tip. They will make the arrests by morning. I want those women in a safe facility before midnight. Sergio blinked. Senior. The women are victims, not criminals. They do not belong in a cell. Make it happen. Yes. Of course. And Hale. Aleandro stood and walked to the window. From his office on the 42nd floor, the city spread out like a circuit board, thousands of lights representing thousands of lives being lived, thousands of people unaware that evil had an address and an organization chart. Mr. Hale, he said slowly, is going to have a visitor tonight. Meanwhile, in a converted closet in the Ashford mansion in Pacific Palisades, Mia was lying in complete darkness with her arm over her eyes. The pain medication had worn off. Her ribs screamed when she breathed. The handprints on her neck had turned from purple to black, finger-shaped bruises that looked like someone had tried to strangle the life out of her and almost succeeded. She had survived the beating. She had survived the hospital. She had survived Aleandro Bianchi appearing like some dark angel and demanding she trust him. But the terror was still there, living in her chest like a second heartbeat. Douglas would come for her. He always did. 7 days had become 6. The $22,000 might as well have been $22 million. She had $5 in her pocket. $5, and Douglas Hale had sent people with fists and violence and the specific instruction to break something that would remind her what happened when she thought she could escape. She thought of her grandmother's recipe book, still sitting on her nightstand where she had left it. On the inside cover, her grandmother had written in fading ink, "When the storm comes, remember that storms pass. You are far stronger than the wind." Mia had read those words 1,000 times. Tonight, they felt like a lie. Around 10:13 p.m., the warehouse in Long Beach experienced a sudden and catastrophic power failure. The backup generators, which should have engaged automatically, had been disabled by someone who understood electrical systems with the precision of an engineer. The guards, 8 of them, found themselves in total darkness for approximately 90 seconds before tactical lights flooded the space. 12 men in black tactical gear moved through the warehouse with the synchronization of a perfectly executed ballet. No gunshots. No screaming. No mercy. Douglas Hale was in the back office, counting money. He did not hear them until the lights were on him. He did not have time to reach the gun in his desk drawer before a hand, strong, precise, belonging to a man named Pietro, twisted his arm backward until his fingers opened of their own accord. "Do not move," Pietro said. His voice was very calm. "Do not scream. Do not think about running. Those are your only 3 options for surviving the next hour." Douglas Hale screamed anyway. The pain was extraordinary. Later, much later, in the federal holding cell where he would spend the next 40 years, he would try to explain to his cellmate what had happened. He would say that they had broken something in him that could not be fixed, that they had done things to his knees and his elbows and his hands with the kind of systematic precision that suggested they had practiced. He would say that at one point he had begged them to just shoot him, to make it end, and they had laughed, not cruelly, but with a kind of sad indifference, and told him that death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful for what he had done. When the LAPT arrived, responding to an anonymous call about trafficking victims, they found 14 women in a storage room, shaken but unharmed. They also found Douglas Hale in the office, conscious and very much in need of medical attention, with his hands zip-tied behind his back and a single business card placed on his chest. The card bore the letterhead of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The 911 call that brought officers to the warehouse also brought the FBI. And the FBI, it turned out, had been building a case against Douglas Hale for 7 years. They were very grateful for the anonymous tip. They were even more grateful to discover, in the computers they seized, evidence linking him to Victoria Ashford. By 6:33 a.m., federal agents were serving a warrant at the Ashford mansion. Victoria was still in bed, silk sheets, face mask, everything arranged for optimal beauty sleep. The sound of the front door coming off its hinges woke her. The sound of federal agents in tactical gear surrounding her bedroom was not something she ever recovered from, not in any meaningful way. She would later tell her lawyer, over and over, that she had only been helping Douglas with a business venture, that she had not known exactly what the business entailed, that she was a victim of circumstance. Her lawyer would advise her to stop talking immediately and invoke her right to remain silent. But the agents already had everything they needed. They had the bank transfers. They had the emails. They had the photographs on her personal computer, organized in folders labeled with dates and locations. They had her in the middle of a conspiracy to traffic human beings across state lines. What they also had, thanks to a very thorough investigation by Sergio and his team, was enough evidence to freeze her assets completely. The $47 million in her various accounts would be seized as proceeds of crime. The mansion would be seized. The investment properties in Miami and Aspen would be seized. By noon, every major news outlet had the story. Wealthy philanthropist arrested in human trafficking ring. The photograph showed Victoria in the back of an SUV, her face very white, her lawyer beside her with the grim expression of a man who has seen the future and it contains prison time. By evening, her country club membership was terminated. Her friends, the ones who were not themselves being investigated, would deny knowing her well. By the end of the week, there were no remaining positions on any boards. No invitations to any events. No society page mentions. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. What changed everything was not the arrests or the photographs or the news cycle. What changed everything was a single conversation that took place in a hospital room at 11:44 p.m. Mia was lying in darkness when Aleandro entered. He did not knock. He carried a sealed envelope and his face was the face of a man who had just finished burning something to ash. "It is over," he said. She did not speak. Both of them. Hale is in federal custody. The Ashford woman is in federal custody. The network has been dismantled. The women are safe. Mia's eyes filled with tears. Not from relief. From something deeper and more terrifying than relief. She had thought she was alone in this. She had thought no one was capable of caring enough to break things. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Aleandro said, pulling a chair beside her bed, "you saved the only person who matters to me. And you deserve to be saved in return." 1 year later, the November sun hung low over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Mia stood in the doorway of the House of Hope, a converted warehouse in downtown that had once been just another abandoned building waiting to collapse. Now it was transformed into something alive. 17 women were inside at this moment, some learning to read, others sitting in the kitchen preparing dinner together, a few in the counseling rooms working through the wreckage of their own stories. She wore a cream-colored blouse and dark jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her hands, those calloused, trembling hands that once belonged to nobody, moved with the certainty of someone who had finally learned to touch the world without apology. Aleandro came to find her there most evenings. He would arrive in his black sedan without the usual convoy of security, because she had asked him to, and he had learned that what she asked for mattered more than protocol. He was reading to Emma in the small library they had built on the second floor, his deep voice moving through the pages of a children's book about a girl who was brave in the dark. Emma sat pressed against his shoulder, her small hand holding the corner of the page, her eyes half closed in that place between waking and dreams where children live. The scar that ran from his left eye to his jawline, a reminder of his brother's betrayal, of the night he had to choose between blood and survival, seemed to fade in the lamplight when he smiled at his daughter. "Mama, listen," Emma whispered as Mia appeared in the doorway. She had been calling her Mama for 3 months now, ever since the day Mia had braided her hair and Emma had said, very simply, "Will you stay?" And Mia had knelt down and taken the child's face in her hands and said yes, yes to everything, yes to staying, yes to being hers. "Daddy is doing all the voices." Aleandro looked up, and something in his expression shifted, something that made the air in the room change temperature. He closed the book gently and set it aside, and without speaking, he lifted Emma and carried her to the small bed in the corner, tucking the blanket around her with hands that had once ordered men to disappear into the October night. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing soft and even. When he returned to Mia in the hallway, he took her hand without preamble. His touch was always certain, never tentative. "Walk with me," he said. The rooftop overlooked the city, the sprawl of lights beginning to emerge as darkness descended. Mia had never been comfortable with heights until she met him. Now the rooftop was one of her favorite places because it was where she felt most alive, most present in the world. The wind carried the smell of rain coming, of changing seasons, of possibility. Aleandro had brought a small velvet box in his jacket pocket. He did not kneel immediately. Instead, he stood beside her and looked out at the city that had once terrified her, and he said, "I have loved you since the night you walked into that dining room covered in blood and did not hesitate. I have loved you since you chose to save my daughter instead of saving yourself. I have loved you with every hour since, and I will love you for every hour remaining." His voice was steady, but his hand trembled as he opened the box. The diamond caught the city lights and threw them back in fractured rainbows. "Mia Harper, will you marry me?" She said yes before he finished the sentence. When Aleandro returned to his office 3 days later, Sergio and Pietro were waiting with the quarterly reports. What they found instead was their boss, the man who had built an empire on the principle of showing no weakness, with his eyes glistening as he told them he was getting married. "To the woman who saved Emma," he said. "To the woman who saved us all." Sergio's jaw tightened. Pietro looked away. Neither had ever seen him like this, and something inside them understood that they were witnessing a metamorphosis. A man becoming human. A monster learning that he could be loved. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in a small church in Santa Monica, nothing like the society spectacle that Victoria Ashford might have orchestrated. There were 47 people present. Mia's co-workers from the House of Hope sat in the pews beside Aleandro's men, all of them witness to something that should not have been possible. The woman who had been beaten and left for dead and the man who had been raised in darkness stood before the priest and made vows that sounded like prayers. She wore white silk that skimmed her body like water. Her grandmother's recipe book sat on the altar, the pages with the margin notes about survival transformed into something sacred. When Aleandro slipped the ring onto her finger, he looked directly into her eyes and repeated words the priest had just spoken, but privately, just for her, "Till death do us part." The reception was held in the garden of the house he had bought for her, a sprawling Mediterranean villa with windows that faced the ocean. Emma danced between them, her small body moving with unself-conscious joy, and when Aleandro lifted her onto his shoulders and she called out, "Mama, look how high," Mia felt her knees weaken. She gripped the edge of the table because she understood in that moment that this was real. That she had moved from being nobody into being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone whose life mattered so entirely that it had transformed a man who had ruled through fear into someone who ruled through love. 2 weeks after the wedding, Mia discovered she was pregnant. She told Aleandro in the morning, standing in their kitchen as sunlight poured through the windows. He stood very still for a long moment, and then he reached for her and held her like she was made of something precious and irreplaceable. "A son," he whispered. "A daughter. Twins. I do not care. This is mercy. This is grace. This is you saying yes to a future with me." Meanwhile, in a federal prison in Northern California, Douglas Hale sat in a cell that measured 8 by 10 feet. His sentence was 42 years. The women whose names he had collected and traded had all testified. Every video, every photograph, every transaction had been documented and entered into evidence. Victoria Ashford occupied a separate facility in a separate state. Her conviction carried a 40-year sentence as well. She spent her days in a small cell with 2 other inmates who had no idea who she was, because the woman Victoria had been, the woman with the country club membership and the philanthropist reputation, had ceased to exist. The news cycle had moved on. Her name appeared in nobody's conversation. She had been erased so completely that she might have been a ghost haunting a world that no longer acknowledged her. This is the gift that darkness sometimes receives from darkness, the opportunity to destroy itself and call it justice. But what Aleandro had learned, what he had finally understood watching Mia hold Emma and then hold the ultrasound photograph of their unborn child, was that this was not the highest justice. The highest justice was to survive. To build something. To transform your hands from weapons into instruments of creation. And so we come to what this story teaches us, not through violence or vindication, but through the quiet revolution of a life rebuilt. Mia Harper was nobody for 28 years. She was invisible, disposable, counted in currency and debt. But the moment she chose to save Emma Bianchi instead of running, the moment she placed her hands on a bleeding child while everyone else froze, she became the most powerful person in that room. Not because she had weapons or money or a name that mattered, but because she possessed something that cannot be manufactured or purchased or stolen. She possessed the willingness to act, to love, to protect something beyond herself. How did this story make you feel? Did you recognize yourself in Mia's journey? Have you ever known someone who went through something similar, someone told they were nobody, someone who decided to believe differently about themselves? Please leave a comment below and share what's in your heart. Every comment you leave reminds us that stories matter, that your voice carries weight, and that you are not alone in this world. Your words fuel everything we create. If this story touched you, please subscribe to this channel. Like this video and share it with the people you love. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the storm will pass and they are far stronger than they think. We wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.